Welcome into the CBS Sports Network for an hour, the only hour on national television, where we talk about college basketball recruiting all the way up to the NBA draft. We're going to start things in the recruiting world because it's getting busy again. So Eric Bossi here to join me. Bossi, we had a commitment this week that came shortly after a reclassification. Lincoln Cosby, who was until very recently a junior at Montverde Academy in Florida, reclassified up and then subsequently committed to Michigan. Now, I view this as really a long-term stock for Dusty May and his program, somebody who may not be necessarily able to come in and make an immediate contribution, at least if they maintain the level they're at this year, but is a significant long-term stock. How would you talk to Michigan fans about what they've got in Lincoln Cosby?
Yeah, if we're being quite frank, at first when this move happened, I was a little bit unsure of why he would want to reclassify and why they would want to go ahead and take him so early, because Lincoln has bounced around a little bit. He's clearly very talented, 6'9", can shoot, can put on the floor, has a lot of long-term ability. And he's also coming off an ACL tear right now. As it turns out, part of this is so that he can get to campus and spend the better part of his, rehab from the ACL tear, getting ready with the Michigan doctors and being around their culture. Now, there's also a good chance that he may ultimately end up redshirting next year, which I think would be great for him in the long term. He gets to sit and watch a high operating program and how they function. He gets to get fully healthy. And for a guy who still needs to get stronger and would be coming off of an injury, he's got plenty of time to get himself right.
So it sounds like in this era of NIL, it's like, hey, you can rehab with Michigan doctors and get paid for it, or you can stay in high school. Is that an oversimplification, or is that basically where we're at?
It's probably not an oversimplification. I don't think it's, written in stone just yet that he will redshirt, because if he can help them, they'll certainly let
Right.
him play. But, if you're a kid and you got a chance to rehab, get ready for the college game and make some money while you're doing it, it works out great. I mean, look at Bryson Tiller at Kansas this year. It's a perfect example. Now, he only spent one semester redshirting while he was getting back from some injuries, but he came back. He was, a little bit unsure early on, but now you look at him and how he's coming on this season, you can see how much that benefited the redshirt and being around a high level program did for him.
All right. Now, at the beginning of the week, we were also expecting a commitment from Dylan Mingo. First, it was Tuesday, then it was Thursday. Both of those dates have come and passed. Still no commitment. This is a recruitment that has evolved a little bit here at the 11th hour. We reported about a month ago, or at least Travis Branham did about a month ago, that Baylor was perceived as the contender. And then the more recent intel was that North Carolina had emerged into the favorite. So I guess my question to you is, given the consistent delays, is the leaderboard evolving again, or do we still expect that this is the Tar Heels recruitment to lose?
I don't think we're seeing a leaderboard evolve again, and I do think that this is still UNC's recruitment to lose. I think this is more of a logistics issue with an announcement than it is a mental issue of this school or that school, and it's just something that hopefully gets taken care of soon. I know probably at home the Mingo family probably isn't super happy that it's taken this long with what they're trying to get done. But I would expect the 6'5" combo guard, who we rank number 8 in the country, to still be leaning towards North Carolina. And I certainly wouldn't be worrying just yet if I was a Tar Heels fan.
And if he does end up in North Carolina, this could be a really intriguing ad for Hubert Davis. Dylan Mingo has been limited by injuries for the vast majority of his senior year, but over the course of the spring and the summer in the EYBL with PSA Cardinals, there were some significant stretches where he was one of the best guards in the country. You're talking about somebody who's 6'5" with a 6'11" wingspan. He's got on-off ball versatility. He's got an ability to get to his spots off the dribble. He's a defensive playmaker, and he can play and defend multiple positions. Obviously, Seth Trimble out of eligibility at North Carolina. So this could be a building block along with hopefully Derek Dixon and maybe potentially one other as they figure out what the three-guard rotation is at Carolina. Of course, that will be pending the commitment, and we are on commitment watch for Dylan Mingo. The other prospect that we are on commitment watch for is Jordan Smith. Now, Jordan Smith, we are expecting to announce his decision tonight. His recruitment has come down to a handful of finalists, and it's been the same schools for the vast majority of the season, places like Duke, Syracuse, Arkansas, and Georgetown. Arkansas is the perceived favorite here, Ebos. We're not in the business of spoiling anybody's announcement, but it does sound like John Calipari is the favorite at this point. What would Jordan Smith mean to the Arkansas program?
Yeah, well, John Calipari certainly thinks he's the favorite since he's expected to be in attendance tonight. So, and that's public knowledge out there right now. So I don't think there's a lot to spoil here, but he'd be huge. I think whether it's at Kentucky or Arkansas, if you have John Calipari as your coach, you're used to getting high level elite guards. But I think Jordan Smith is a little bit different than the usual type of guy that John Calipari has gotten. I think he brings a grit and a mentality, a hard hat mentality to both sides of the floor that you haven't always gotten out of them. And that's no disrespect to any of the guys he's got, because obviously the list of guys who have played for Calipari from Derrick Rose up to Darius Acuff this year is, too long to list all of it. But Smith is, he's more of a grimy, in your face on both sides of the floor, really make things happen with his effort and his athleticism. And as well as that's been going on, his skill has been coming along.
If I'm John Calipari and I'm looking into who can possibly replace Darius Acuff, who is not just the front runner for SEC Player of the Year, but whose usage is really high in this Arkansas program. So much of their offense begins with him, whether he's scoring it, whether he's throwing the assist, or frankly, whether it's the hockey assist, the play that ends up allowing them to play in some sort of numerical advantage after that. I think Jordan Smith is the only player in high school basketball capable of stepping into those minutes. But he is a vastly different type of player, to your point. He's not someone who's going to be as ball dominant as Acuff. In fact, I think one of the things that differentiates Smith is the number of ways he can impact the game. He's certainly capable of getting those on-ball reps, and I'm sure that's going to be a big part of what they found appealing about Arkansas if this does come to fruition. But I think who you surround him with is going to be really important. And I look at like DJ Wagner. If he comes back for his senior season, you've got an experienced ball handler to play on and off the ball with Smith. Then you got Malik Thomas, who I think is fair to say a fringe first round guy. What will he do? If he comes back, now you've got a dynamic shot maker and scorer to put along Jordan Smith. So if they can retain those two guys, I think that's a really good recipe for the Arkansas backcourt. But again, I do think Jordan Smith is the only high school basketball player in the country with any chance of stepping into the void left by Darius Acuff's eventual jump to the NBA, although they are very different types of players. Let's talk about another five-star guy that we have mentioned a number of times on this show. Christian Collins, we talked about it. He was initially perceived to be a Kentucky lean earlier in the season, right around the early signing period. We expected both him and Tyron Stokes to end up being Wildcats. Neither one of them were. And now it sounds like things could be trending in another direction. What is the latest with this 6'8" forward?
I think as time goes on, we're moving from a status where Christian was pretty wide open to things to now he's maybe leaning towards staying home a little bit, and looking at what they've got going on at USC and how they've been willing to showcase a freshman, especially if you look at the usage of Elijah Arenas since he's come back from injury. I really think that Coach Musselman and the Trojans are starting to pick up a lot of steam here and should probably be considered the favorites. Ever since things kind of quieted down with Kentucky, like I said, after an initial bit of being wide open, it's been more and more he'd like to stay home. He'd like to stay home. And I really think that right now, USC is kind of that best fit for his playing style and for what he might be looking for as a situation during his freshman year.
And remember, Muss, even back to Arkansas, has a significant history of bringing in highly ranked recruits, guys like Nick Smith, Anthony Black, Jordan Walsh, and showcasing them right off the bat. So you mentioned Arenas, and that is a more than fair point. But this is a coach who I think embraces the storytelling as much as anybody in college basketball, and has a proven track record of being willing to let these freshmen kind of play through their mistakes if they're highly talented guys. One other piece of recruiting news on the trail this weekend, and that was Adam Umudouch from Overtime Elite. He was committed to St. John's. He requested and, according to Travis Branham, received a release from that commitment. So he is back on the market. Bossi, what do we know about this guy and what could come next in his process?
Yeah, well, first of all, with St. John's, I think he just looking at the type of players that Rick Pitino plays, older players. He just didn't think that that was going to be the best fit for him. And certainly Pitino has been vocal about not needing to really recruit high school kids. So I'm sure that resonated with him and maybe have some second thoughts. So there's some schools that I think I would look at immediately. Villanova, Oregon, and Illinois are three other schools that he took visits to. I know that Georgia and Miami have been involved. But Villanova is actually coming in to see Adam at Overtime Elite today in Atlanta. So certainly they're one who's making an early push, and they were one that, as we were coming down to the final decision with St. John's, Villanova was really making a strong push late. So I'm not going to go and say they're the favorite or anything like that, but if there was one school that I'd be keeping my eye on early, it might be Villanova.
Well, and the same thing with Kevin Willard, right? You look at the year that Caden Lewis is having there. He's shown a willingness to play freshman guards and win with freshman guards. I would argue that he is ahead of schedule in year one at Villanova. He had a great interview recently with John Rothstein that you can find right here on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page, talking about some of those young guys. Matt Hodge, a redshirt freshman. So there's a very bright future at Villanova as they look to compete for a potential spot in the NCAA tournament in year one of the Kevin Willard era. So it has been a busy week on the recruiting front. And again, we're expecting some big news tonight as Jordan Smith is expected to come off the board in a little less than 6 hours. So stay tuned to all the socials as well as 247sports.com. You're not going to want to go anywhere right now, though. We will be back right here on the CBS Sports Network for a little college basketball talk as Boss and I are joined by Isaac Trotter. That's coming up next. All right, earlier this week, the Wooden Award announced their late midseason top 20 watch list. It included guys like Darius Acuff, Christian Anderson, Cameron Boozer, Joshua Jefferson, Yaxel Lundeborg, Darren Peterson, Jeremy Fierce, Kingston Flemings, PJ Haggerty, Bennett Sturts, Tyler Tanner, and JT Toppin. And now Isaac Trotter and Eric Bossi. We're going to break down what was right and what was wrong with this list. Trotter, first of all, welcome to the show. Second of all, tell me who's missing from this list.
Objectively a great list, but no Zuby Ejiofor from St. John's is kind of egregious. 16 points a game, over 7 rebounds. But the playmaking from Zuby has been incredible this year. An assist rate over 25 in conference play. That's one of the best 7 marks in the entire Big East. So there's 20 players on this list. And honestly, I was fine with about 19 of them. But I think we need a Big East representative here, and Zuby Ejiofor has been arguably the best small ball big man in all of college basketball this season.
And we talked about Zuby last week when we were previewing the potential Player of the Year awards, talked about him as the leader in the Big East. Bossi, Trotter said he's fine with 19 of those 20. Who's the one that you're not fine with?
So my eyes go directly to the state of Kansas on this one. Frankly, you could argue that Darren Peterson shouldn't be on the list considering he's missed half the games. But the extreme outlier to me, unfortunately, is PJ Haggerty of Kansas State. Now, don't get me wrong, he's having a great individual season. He's averaging 23 points per game. He's the second leading scorer in the country. He's getting a lot of assists. But K-State is 10-14 overall, 1-10 in the Big 12. And has a coach who just publicly called out their team and said none of them deserve to wear the uniform. Now, I know that individual stuff matters in the Wooden Award, but I also think this is an award where winning should matter. And I mentioned that he's an outlier. Let me go ahead and explain why he's an outlier. Of the 19 other teams on this list, 17 play for teams that are currently ranked in the top 25. The 2 who don't play for teams in the top 25, Alabama's LeBaron Philon and Bennett Sturts of Iowa. Alabama and Iowa are the first and second teams receiving votes outside the top 25. Kansas State is number 105 in the Ken Palm and number 104 in the net. A few more. Only AJ DeBonsa, who plays for BYU, plays for a team that isn't at least 3 games above 500 in conference play. So I would have liked to seen that spot maybe go to another kid who is affecting winning. Maybe Ryan Conwell at Louisville. Bryce Sanford at number 6 Nebraska is doing things that have never been done in the history of the program. Or maybe even a guy like Lamar Wilkerson, who's absolutely lighting it up in Indiana and has taken them from the bubble to a strong tournament contender. So nothing against PJ Haggerty. He's obviously a great individual player, but I think with an award like the Wooden Award, winning has to matter too. And that's why I think he's the guy who's the outlier.
All right, Bossi. I love it when Bossi comes with the receipts too. It just makes for such good content. Trotter, talk to us about like some of the other guys who could have been on their list. I feel like this is an extension of that conversation we had last week about the Big East Player of the Year, where we're saying, hey, Zuby's a good candidate, or you could pick anyone on UConn. I mean, UConn right now, I believe they're tracking as a number 1 seed. They don't have a single player on this list. And it's kind of like those guys are being penalized for sacrificing for the greater good, where you've got somebody like Haggerty who's putting up empty stats on a team that's not winning. Who are some other players that could be in the mix for a list like this for the All-American nods once the season comes to an end. Who else should we be thinking about?
I thought Bossi's names are really good. I think Lamar Wilkerson's a big name. Abuka Akori out of Stanford has basically drugged that program from a team that a lot of people thought would be at the bottom of the ACC. He's had an incredible freshman year. I think you could look at someone like Bruce Thornton at Ohio State, who's putting up major counting stats for an Ohio State team that's probably going to make the NCAA tournament. Keyshawn Hall has been one of the best scorers for an Auburn team that I would expect to make the tournament. But you're right. I think UConn's on that short list of teams that could win the national championship. And the only reason we don't have one of their guys on here is just because of the beauty of balance. They have 3, 4, Silas Demery, Terrace Reed, Alex Caravan, even, if you want to, throw Solo Ball into that mix, or Braylon Mullins, they have 5 really, really good players. And I think that's impacting, some of their counting stats for an award like this.
All right. Now, when we're talking about the best players in the country, there was also some news this week, which I think we've got to get into, and that's Caleb Wilson going down for North Carolina, an injury that sounds like it has the potential to cost him the rest of the season. Of course, he left that inspiring message to Tar Heel fans. Bossi, I'm going to start with you. Let's start here. What do you think the chances are that we see Caleb Wilson again in a North Carolina uniform?
Man, I'm a skeptic these days, so I would put them fairly low. But Caleb Wilson has proven to be a little bit differently wired. I generally think that if he's capable of playing, I think he will come back. But I also think that those around him, family, agents, people like that, will be extremely cautious with him so that this doesn't develop into something that's a long-term issue.
I respect the fact that he came right out and what was it? It's not over? He said something like that. And I just love the competitive fire of this guy. Trotter, this is a North Carolina team that already had to overcome one major injury when Seth Trimble went down earlier in the season after that weight room incident. This is a different kind of injury, though, because Caleb Wilson has been way better than anyone expected. How would you expect Hubert Davis and that coaching staff to tweak their approach if Caleb Wilson is out for the entire or even the vast majority of the season?
Yeah, I don't see a scenario where this Carolina defense has the same amount of teeth or interior fortitude that they've shown at certain points this year. So I think you have to pivot and be like, we're just going to try to outscore everybody. I think that you're going to see more minutes for Jaron Stevenson. I think Jonathan Powell is going to get more minutes. Luka Bogavac is going to have an even bigger offensive role. And I would expect Carolina to just start chucking from 3. With that type of personnel, I think you're going to see a lot of times where you have 5 shooters on the floor basically at all times. 50% of your shots have to come from 3. We'll see if their offensive rebounding can get after it. But there's no question, this is a huge blow because Caleb has also been just like their emotional leader. And there's so many times where it feels like their offense is kind of going skittering into the mud. And Caleb Wilson just saves it with a extremely awesome hustle play, gets an offensive rebound, just keeps the ball alive. So it's a tough loss. And I feel like right now you're basically going to have to hope 3-point variance is on your side because Carolina's going to be taking a lot of 3s from here on out.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we're going to see is even more spotlight on Henry Vesar, who's had a terrific season. I think you're going to see Seth Trimble come back into the forefront and be more of a focal point. I think Derek Dixon, who, he's someone we talked about on this show 6 weeks ago when Trimble was out, someone who we said hey, we don't expect his minutes to drop again. Well, they dipped a little bit when Trimble came back, but now they're at an unprecedented level because I think Hubert Davis has really seen hey, this guy has got to be on the floor. You take into account Caleb Wilson playing alongside Jaron Stevenson, they were playing really, really big. And I think with Stevenson at the 4, you're still fine if you can, especially when you have tough physical guards like Trimble. I don't think you're giving up too much from a size perspective. I just think, to your point, Trotter, the athleticism, the energy, all that stuff is going to be missed. They're just not going to be the same team. Let me say this about Caleb Wilson. If this is the end of his season, what a season he had. Exceeded all expectations. And this is a guy who was a 5-star prospect, McDonald's All-American, Peach Jam champion. He won everything there was to win in high school, and he was I don't want to exaggerate, but he was significantly better than anyone expected this year at North Carolina. So for Tar Heel fans, here's hoping that he can get back in the lineup because that program was riding high after that Duke win. And for him to go down the very next game and then for them to lose that, obviously that is demoralizing. But this guy has given everything to the Tar Heels. we hope he can get back soon. All right, we're going to come back. We've got more college basketball takes. Instead, we're calling it 3 points made, as Bossi, Trotter, and I all will have a point just to keep an eye on in the coming weeks of college basketball. That's coming up next right here on the CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Network, where we've got 3 points to make. Eric Bossi, Isaac Trotter, and myself all have something we want to get off our chest here based on the last week or so of the college basketball season. And Bossi, we will start to you. What is your first point to make?
Yeah, so I've been seeing and reading and hearing recently that this may be one of Bill Self's best coaching jobs ever at Kansas. And obviously, when you're talking about a Hall of Famer who's got multiple national championships, 4 Final Fours, and a total of 20 conference titles under his belt, that's a pretty big statement. And we're not to the end of the season yet, so we don't have the final results to really back up what's going on. But if we're going to go by the vibe check on this thing, I think that you could argue that this is absolutely the best coaching job that Self's done since they won the national title in 2022. And it might be at least a top 2 or 3 job that he's done coaching ever. One, they don't quite have the talent that they used to. What really sticks out to me is he's essentially coaching 2 different teams right now, in my mind. When Darren Peterson is healthy and on the floor, he's coaching a team that is dominant by Darren Peterson that runs through Peterson. When Peterson is off, he's coaching a team that's run through Melvin Council. And that's not an easy thing for a coach to do, especially when they haven't really known on a game-to-day basis what exactly they're going to get from Peterson. And they've often had to switch things up in the middle of it. So that's something that's incredibly hard to do. And when you look at it, they have only lost 2 games since their home loss to UConn on December 2nd. Funny enough, those losses were at West Virginia and UCF, places you wouldn't expect them to lose. But they beat Arizona, who was undefeated, the number 1 team in the country. And just you see how the rest of the players are developing. You know, Trey White was a guy that people were skeptical of when he get to Kansas. He's on his 4th school. Bill Self has gotten the best of him. He's turned Floyd Badunga into one of the best defensive players, really one of the best 2-way players in the country. And then there's Melvin Council, who I've been in the Kansas City area for a long time, and I can't remember a guy, and Bill Self spoke about this the other night, who's put his handprint on a program in the way that he has, and is really seems to have lit a fire under Self. The emotion that Self showed after that Arizona win the other night, it was almost like national championship winning type emotion, the way he was hugging Melvin Council, the way he was hugging Floyd Badunga, saluting the crowd. So I think as we're going along, I think this is a top 2 or 3 coaching job that Self's done, to go along with probably the 2022 championship team and the 2012 team that lost the national championship game to Kentucky.
Trotter, anything that's yeah, go.
Yeah, the other thing I noticed too at Kansas is just like the offseason moves were hits. Outside of Jaden Dawson, like Melvin Council was an unbelievable eval. Trey White, really, really good eval. Here's another portal impact one. Flory Badunga was gone, and they're able to go and be able to get him to come back. Like those 3 moves. Oh, and landing Darren Peterson, kind of a big deal when he's healthy. Like those types of moves are kind of where we're at right now. And honestly, I feel like Self's, his demeanor or maybe his vibe in the portal was questioned a bit after the last few recruiting cycles where he whiffed on some pretty big names. This year, I feel like he's kind of earned that cachet back, that maybe he knows what he's doing in the portal too.
I think we got to talk a little bit about Bryson Tiller in this one too, right? Because that's a guy who came in mid-season and redshirted. So he's technically a redshirt freshman right now, but he and Badunga collectively, especially when you look at that Arizona game, that's a team that beats you up in the paint. And those 2 guys held their own. I think Tiller's ability to play inside and out and do it in an increasingly efficient way, he's bought into what Bill Self is preaching. And in high school, I mean, Bossi, you know this. This is a guy who had all the length, had the frame, everything, but it was like, hey, man, go punish people inside. Well, Self has gotten him to do more of that. He's dunking the ball much more. He's attacking the rim much more. And simultaneously, he's developing that shooting range. I'll add this to your point, Boss. I think, in normal circumstances, this could have been a really rough locker room because of all the narratives about Darren Peterson. He's, the Kobe Bryant comparisons, which I just have a really hard time with. And then the hey, he's not playing when he could be. It would be easy for that locker room to be divided. But this is a team that looks anything but divided. I mean, they're joking with each other in the press conference. Flory's teasing Melvin in the press conference about the number of shots he takes. So this is a group that looks connected, and you don't get through this type of adversity unless you have leadership from the top. And I think this is an underrated point. Cohesion in the staff too. Like the staff has to echo the message from the general. Otherwise, it's going to splinter. And they've done, I think, to your point, boss, a remarkable job of handling not just adversity, but unpredictable adversity in terms of who's going to play when. Trotter, we will pivot to you. The second point to make. What do you got?
Yeah, I like playing with a good point guard. So here's my all defense team as we're kind of a month away from March Madness. And so I'm going position by position. It's not the 5 best pure defenders, but at each position. Point of attack, we're going with Killian Toure out of Iowa State. 6'3", 205 pounds, total menace. He basically guards the top guard on the scouting report basically every single night for an Iowa State defense. That's one of the top 5 or 6 units in the country. So I'll take him there. At the 2, Bishop Boswell from Tennessee. Terrific defensive player. He's basically turned into like the Jemai Meshack clone for Tennessee this year. And here's one stat. He's like one of the best rebounders for 6'4" guards like that you can find in college basketball. Only 2 high major guards have a higher defensive rebounding rate than Bishop Boswell. So he's able to end possessions as well as kind of disrupt them. And he's a steal machine. All right, at the 3, we're going to Miles Byrd from San Diego State. He's like a pterodactyl. He's one of the elite shot blocking and steal producing wings in college basketball. Only 4 players are able to have a steal rate and a block rate both north of 4%, and Miles Byrd is one of them. And then inside, like I'm building just an absolute fortress. Flory Badunga, we brought him up earlier. He absolutely should be in the conversation for National Defensive Player of the Year. He can guard big wings like AJ DeBonsa. He can guard big forwards like JT Toppin. He's been terrific. And Kansas's defense is 20 points per 100 possessions better when Flory Badunga is on the floor against top 100 competition. It's just remarkable how much better their defense is with him. And then last but not least, he's a mountain of a man, Florida's Ruben Chinyelu. One of the best interior defenders in the country. Florida's rim defense is elite when he's on the floor. And if you haven't seen that possession against Alabama where he slides the puppies against Latrell Wrightsell Jr. and LeBaron Philon forces a shot clock violation, that's one of the best individual defensive possessions of the season. And you don't have to look far to find really awesome stats that back up your argument. Chinyelu's been the SEC Defensive Player of the Year frontrunner for me, in my opinion. So those are my 5 all defensive teams with March looming.
Bossi, I'm going to go to you. And listen, you're a very nice person, but I want you to like really dig in here and tell Trotter where he's wrong. Don't hold back here, right? Which one do you have gripe with?
The only one I thought was I could maybe make a case for Tyler Tanner at Vanderbilt at the point. He's not the biggest guy around, but he really wreaks some havoc with what he does. He gets into passing lanes. He's a pest on the ball. Really, that team feeds off of him and what he does defensively. So he's the main guy I got. But for the most part, I have a hard time disagreeing with much that Trotter has on this one. As much as I'd like to, drag him through the mud on this, I can't.
Trotter, the Killian Toure pick, it's interesting. He shared a backcourt last year at Brewster Academy with Ibuka Okori. I mean, talk about an underrated collective backcourt to go into Iowa State and to get that top matchup. What was it like? Is there more, if we peel back the onion, is there more to why you think he's the best at the point of attack?
Just relentless. He picks guys up for 94 feet. He is a hound. And I think the thing about him too is that like he doesn't let his offense kind of impact his defense at all. Sometimes he's making shots, sometimes he's not. The defense is basically just like his calling card constantly. And I saw him up close in person against Purdue as well. Very few defenders are able to make Braden Smith uncomfortable. Killian Toure is on the short list of guys that made Braden Smith uncomfortable. And Smith is, arguably the best point guard in all of college basketball.
All right, guys, it is time for my take to complete this 3-point shot. I want to talk a little bit about the Charles Bediako ruling, and I don't want to belabor points already made. So I'm not going to talk about what it means for Alabama, their NCAA tournament hopes. I'm not going to talk about what it means for other players' eligibility. I want to discuss the implications on the NBA draft, because if Bediako had been permitted to play for the season, essentially it would have wiped out the NBA's rule about the withdrawal date, meaning that players would have been able to declare for the draft, theoretically go through the draft process, maybe go through summer league, and have really no deadline for which they could choose to come back to college basketball. That would have created a ton of stress on the system, especially for the college coaches trying to create their rosters. The implications right now are not just for college basketball, though. They are also for the NBA. Remember last year, we had a very small, the depth of the draft was questioned because a lot of players who were fringe first rounders opted to go back to college for big NIL paydays. And in the wake of the Bediako decision, I think that could happen again, particularly because we are looking at a wide open 2027 draft. You talk about guys like Elijah Arenas, Malik Thomas, two players that we've talked about in this show and in recent weeks. And there's a host of others. Like, did they elect to stay in the draft and chase one of those 30 guaranteed contracts when the second round picks aren't necessarily guaranteed? Or do they take guaranteed multi-million-dollar deals in college and then make a run at a wide open 2027 draft? My suspicion, now that we have, at least for the time being, some closure about what this could mean, is that we will see less depth staying in the NBA draft this year. Had the ruling gone the other way, I think we would have seen the floodgates open. Everybody would have declared they would have stayed through the draft, and roster construction in college basketball would have been virtual chaos in terms of how late it would have gone into the summer. I don't think we're going to see that now. I'll give you both a chance to respond to that. Bossi, I will start with you.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, let's take a look at JT Toppin, who stayed in school for a big money deal. His NBA draft outlook probably hasn't changed that much, but he's still worth an awful lot of money to Texas Tech if they want to bring him back. And he's likely worth much more than he would make on an NBA roster during that year. So he should stay in. Maybe a guy like Tahad Pettiford, who took a chance at going to the NBA last year and ultimately came back. He's another one where you would think it's probably going to make a lot more sense for a guy like that to come back to school, where, especially Stephen Pearl trying to, get a program going in year two. That guy's going to be exceedingly valuable to him. And it's a situation where in the past, the college players haven't held all the cards before. Now they hold all the cards. They've got the advantage. They've got the upper hand in these deals, and really provides a lot of flexibility and a lot of security in making a decision.
Trotter, real quick, final thought on this.
Yeah, I just think you're going to see the second round is going to be littered with seniors, like a Sion James who came out of Duke last year and turned into a nice player. Ryan Kalkbrenner, another senior who's turned into a nice role player right away. That's what the second round, I think, will turn into moving forward, because there's just not a lot of upside for underclassmen who can cash in the money in college and aren't a guaranteed first round pick to kind of risk it right now these days.
All right, don't go anywhere. We're coming right back here on the CBS Sports Network. Isaac Trotter and I are doing a deep dive on the Houston program and whether or not they are the best team in college basketball. That's coming up next. March is right around the corner, and over the course of the next few weeks, Trotter and I are going to do some deep dives on the teams we consider to be legitimate national championship contenders. Now, this is not going to be narrative-based. This is strictly about between the lines, what makes them good on the basketball floor. The first team we're going to talk about is Houston and Kelvin Sampson, who made the Final Four last year and were within a possession of having just a record-setting outcome, both for the program and the coach. Trotter, as we look at this version of the Houston team, what makes them a legitimate national championship contender?
Well, this is the best half-court offense that Kelvin Sampson has ever had. He's been a guy that, we've seen them turn defense into offense. Their transitions offense is usually terrific, but their half-court offense is humming right now. And I think that's an underrated subplot that gives Houston a little bit more beef in March more than ever. And it comes with this backcourt: Emmanuel Sharp, Milos Uzan, and Kingston Flemings. I think I would take them pound for pound over any backcourt in college basketball. And there's a couple reasons why. Milos Uzan is a terrific defensive player who takes the number one assignment almost every night. Emmanuel Sharp is also a terrific defensive player who can take the number two assignment every night. Kingston Flemings has become one of the elite freshmen in all of college basketball. So they can all shoot, they can all pass, they can all play on the ball, they can all play off the ball. It's just meshed together into a really, really dangerous unit. So the guard play, the better half court offense, an elite half court offense now compared to other teams of the Sampson era. And then you add in like the non-negotiables that make this Houston team kind of the Houston program that they are. I think it's really working for me. I think there's a real chance that like Houston is being a smidge undervalued nationally when this team should be, kind of considered with the Michigans and with the Arizonas and maybe with the Dukes in that tier 1 national title contender mix.
The first thing I want to say about Houston is there's this like misnomer out there that everybody plays hard. There's levels to that. And when you see Houston in person, the way in which like the sheer intensity with which they move, with which they rotate, with which they are demanded excellence on every single possession. I mean, that level of just sheer force, they play harder than almost anybody. Let me say it this way. I don't know of another team that I would say, oh yeah, they play harder than Houston. I think Houston plays as hard, if not harder, than any team in the country. And that is their identity. You can go back and watch the interview we had with Kelvin Sampson last year where we broke down his system. But I think like before we get too granular, you've just got to start with the main thing. And the main thing is these dudes play super hard. And then in terms of the personnel, everybody you just mentioned, along with Chris Sinak and along with JoJo Tugler, I think 5 years from now is playing in the NBA. And when we look back at this, like college rosters and who did what, you look back at what Florida did last year, what UConn did the 2 years prior. I think they have a way of those guys have a way of finding their way to the NBA. And I think Houston has pro caliber talent that is allowing themselves to be coached by one of the most demanding college coaches of our generation. I want to dig into one point you made, though, about the shooting. We've talked at length about how Kingston Fleming's one of those guys who's way better than we thought. Finished as a top 20 prospect, but is right now, I think I had him 5 in last week's mock draft. The reason for that disconnect is I didn't have faith in the shooting. Talked about that. I worried about his mechanics, and he started the year shooting well above 40%. Since then, though, we've seen that start to go back down to what's expected. The reason the numbers are dropping slower is because he's been apprehensive to shoot the threes. So to me, I think that is something to watch. I think, listen, the other two, the rest of the perimeter has enough shot making. Senak's been willing to fire. But if you have 2 non-shooters on the floor at any time and you run relatively simplistic offensive concepts, and please push back on any of this you want, I worry a little bit about will the offense be as good in a half-court setting down the stretch. I mean, I can remember being at the Final Four. You and I were sitting there together. They're holding up that whiteboard, calling out the play, and I remember I was like, "Wait, that's it?" It was like zipper, ball screw, whatever it was, and I was like, "That's it? That's all we got right now?" What are your thoughts on if this offense continues to be as good?
Yeah, I think it was 14 was the play call I remember. And I'm like, wait, a 1-4 pick and roll? And that is exactly what it was. So that is a total fair pushback, I think, to Houston. Now, here's the other part of why I think their offense is actually a little bit better. The turnover aversion is real. Like they have 3 basically guys on the floor that make the most important decisions that just don't turn the basketball over. So when you're an elite offensive rebounding team like Houston plays and you don't turn the basketball over, it kind of mitigates some of the shots that are a little bit iffier. And if you want to diss Houston's shot selection, I'm open to that. They take a lot of jumpers. There's not one guy on this roster that you're like, you could throw it into at the mid-post area for those mid-post backdowns. Like the Juwan Roberts, mid-post backdowns last year was a nice little addition to their offense. They haven't really trusted JoJo Tugler to do that. They tried early and then they were kind of removed it. So there is a lot of jumpers on this profile. There isn't a lot of free throws in this profile. So that can be a little bit of a concern, I think, for this group, but not turning the basketball over, winning the margins on the offensive glass, being such a good defense that turns defense into offense, and a young team that's really eliminated some of those, non-Houston-like defensive mistakes that we had seen early in the season. I think that's kind of where you could see them make up for it. And their style of play, as you were talking about, I think the most important thing is their style of play travels on the road. and travels on neutral sites. And so like that's something that not every team can have. And I think I looked it up this year. Like I think Houston in road games or even in neutral games, I think they're like top 12 in net rating in just those road and away games or and neutral games. That's something that I think is sticky moving forward. Their style of play, whether you're playing in Houston, whether you're playing in Indy, whether you're playing in, the West Coast, East Coast, Houston's kind of looks like Houston every night.
All right, now let's flip it a little bit and talk about where they could be vulnerable, because everybody's vulnerable somewhere. I will start with this. I think if you're playing Houston, you talked about the turnover game, you've got to keep that close. If you have any chance to beat Houston, you cannot get killed with the turnovers. And I also think three-point shooting is an important variable. As good as they have been offensively this year, you said they take a lot of jumpers. They take a lot of tough twos. They take a lot of long twos. The other thing defensively that they've always done is give up a certain volume of three-point shots, but force a lower percentage, which is counterintuitive. Most teams, those two things come in correlation. Houston manages to be the exception to that. Again, Kelvin Sampson talked about that in last year's interview. So I think you got to take care of the basketball, and I think you have to make threes in order to beat this team. In order to have a chance to beat this team. What other vulnerabilities do you see for Houston as you start to look about like when they face legitimate national championship contenders?
I love this question because I just really think about this stuff a lot. And I think the teams that are best set to beat Houston, like you almost have to have every single player on the floor who's an offensive threat. If there's anybody that they can't that they can ignore or don't really need to guard that well, you are cooked. Like you're just shredded. So I think that's why we've seen Texas Tech be able to find cracks in their armor a little bit, because they have like 5 guys on the floor who can all pass, dribble, and shoot to some extent. And there's not a long list of teams in the country that have 5 guys that are an offensive threat. Like if you're playing Michigan State, they don't have 5 guys who's a threat. Like, I think you could maybe look at Michigan. They have that. Even Arizona at times, I don't know if they have that, but like Illinois has 5 guys who can all pass, dribble, and shoot at the same time on the floor. There's not a long list of teams that have that. And that's why I think you saw like a BYU run into issues against this defense, because they were kind of funneling the ball into guys' hands that didn't really have an ability to kill them. And that's an interesting subplot that I think if you're on Selection Sunday, you're a Houston fan, you're looking at our draw, you're like, all right, how many teams are we going to face that have 5 truly plus offensive players on the floor at one time? Those are the teams that can have a chance to beat Houston. If you don't have that, I think you're done.
Great stuff from Isaac Trotter. As always, you can find him on cbssports.com. Don't go anywhere. We're coming back with my final shot right here on the CBS Sports Network. There's been a lot of talk about tanking this week in the NBA, and it is not unexpected. In fact, last week, if you watched the show, we had Sam Quinn on, and I don't want to say we told you so, but we expected teams like Utah, teams like Indiana, who made trades to theoretically make themselves better, to hit the pause button on that until next season because they were incentivized to do so. Of course, they were not alone. So this week, when that happened, and both of those franchises have now been fined by the NBA, a lot of people are talking about what can they do to avoid tanking. Well, I'm going to tell you what causes tanking. An awesome draft class. The 2026 draft class is as good and deeper than advertised, and that is what is motivating tanking. Now, there may be other creative ways to help discourage it, but you know what else is going to discourage it? A 2027 and a 2028 NBA draft that aren't nearly as deep or as talented on the top. So again, some of this is just organic and a credit to an absolutely loaded 2026 draft. You can go back to our YouTube page, CBS Sports College Basketball, find that entire segment with Sam Quinn, as well as other shows throughout this year. While you're there, you can find stuff from Matt Norlander, Gary Parrish, and John Rothstein. Check it out, the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page.